One of the ugly features of the last federal election was the performance of this outfit, GetUp. Interesting that many candidates contesting seats for the left believed GetUp was more of a hindrance than a help to them. A number of candidates who hoped to remove the coalition have said GetUp volunteers alienated undecided voters in electorates they were contesting. They say GetUp's focus on climate change was obsessive and counterproductive. They have said that GetUp volunteers at polling booths were pushy, bullying and aggressive, and used strident language towards voters and Liberal volunteers, many of whom were retirees. They say this turned off many voters. Tim Murray, Labor's candidate in Wentworth, said, "I didn't feel GetUp was helping with the by-election or the general election. It was very frustrating. It was harmful to the non-Liberal vote." Another unnamed, unsuccessful Labor candidate said, "On multiple levels, I look at GetUp and a bunch of student effing activists taking money from people like my mum for scare campaigns about the Great Barrier Reef." He said if Bill had won, they would have claimed credit and said, "How do we push the Labor Party further to the left?" Peter Dutton, who beat the GetUp onslaught, described them as deceptive, undemocratic and unrepresentative. They spent well over $1 million trying to beat him in the seat in that seat in Queensland, Dixon. Dutton said they had behaved deceptively and had taken money under false pretences, referring to campaign donations being sought for billboards which never appeared in the electorate. Of course, as we know, most of the resources were directed against Tony Abbott in perhaps the most vulgar and dishonest campaign ever mounted in this country. Mr Dutton has said he'll back parliamentary processes to, quote, bring this activist group to heel, and he'll join others to have the Australian Electoral Commission define GetUp as an associated political entity of Labor or the Greens. That would damage their claim to be independent and damage their appeal to so-called supporters. On their website, prior to the election, GetUp said, "Standing in our way are a small number of hard right politicians who are blocking change for the better." That's why this election, GetUp members are taking these wreckers on, going into seats they've held safely for many years. GetUp provided volunteers and how to vote cards in favour of the charlatan Oakshott at voting booths in Cowper. A GetUp press release admitted they would deploy 1,750 volunteers to 29 electorates on election day, that they would hand out 800,000 how-to-vote cards in favour of Oakshott, Stegall, Karen Phelps and Julia Banks. They raised $12.5 million in donations over the past year. The GetUp boss is a bloke called Peter Oosting. On Melbourne radio, Paul Oosting. He didn't know Josh Frydenberg was the treasurer, and he didn't know Frydenberg wasn't Deputy Prime Minister. Well, one person who's belled the cat is Nicole Flint, the member for Boothby in Adelaide South. She's 40. She was elected in 2016. She was targeted by GetUp, who described her to its South Australian members as South Australia's most backward politician. Well, she set GetUp on their backside. She held the seat quite comfortably in the end. But this woman has ability. Her great-grandfather served in World War I. He was a prisoner of war for over 18 months. Nothing flash about the upbringing. Attended the local schools, made it to Flinders University in the heart of Boothby, where she graduated in arts and law with first-class honours. She worked for Liberal leaders Brendan Nelson and Malcolm Turnbull. How she suffered the latter, no one knows. But before being elected to Boothby, the first woman elected since the seat was established in 1903, she wrote for the Melbourne Age newspaper and the Adelaide Advertiser. As I've said, she's belled the cat. She talked about GetUp's, quote, concerted attack to destroy me mentally. She joins us tonight from Canberra. Nicole, thank you for joining us.
Good evening, Alan. Good evening, Richo. It's lovely to be with you. And Alan, I just have to start by saying you look absolutely magnificent this evening. You can see I love a bit of colour in my jackets, and I'm so pleased to see you in one of my favourite colours, pink, this evening.
There, see you, Richard.
I mean, I wish you hadn't said that. You know, this bloke doesn't need his ego built up anymore. Trust me, he doesn't.
Well, Richo, maybe you could embrace some colour next week for us.
There you are. So
well.
that dreary stuff you've got on there. Nicole.
Well, I could, but I probably won't.
You talked about the aggressively personal attacks by GetUp towards you. Can you amplify that observation?
Alan, you know, it's sort of hard to know where to begin. In terms of what they did, it was, as some of my colleagues have described, they really threw the kitchen sink at me. So it was everything from print material in people's letterboxes, print advertising in our newspapers, a vehement social media campaign. It was a lot, whether it was, Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, they were there. But there was a lot of protesters that they organised as well. And that's where, on top of their other efforts, things became quite challenging, because we weren't just seeing protesters outside of my office or outside of events that were publicly advertised. They were popping up at places that they couldn't have known that I was going to be at unless someone had tipped them off.
Nicole, you have said that your office was egged, that your posters were defaced, you were labelled a prostitute, there were signs saying $60 an hour, you were shouted down at candidate debates, you were stalked to the extent that you had to call the South Australian Police to guarantee your safety. Did you fear for your safety?
Absolutely, yes. I wouldn't have gone to the police if I hadn't. And what really concerns me, Alan, is that this sort of behaviour, if we see it continue, will discourage good people going into politics, people who just want to make a difference. And whether they're male or female, they will be discouraged having seen this sort of behaviour. So that's why I've spoken out, because I want to make sure that people don't suffer the treatment that I suffered, and a lot of my colleagues suffered. So you've mentioned, you know, Peter Dutton, Tony Abbott, Greg Hunt, Josh Frydenberg, Christian Porter, Kevin Andrews were all targeted in a very similar fashion this election.
Graham,
are they a bigger threat to you than Labor in that sense? Because it seems to me, from what you're saying, that the real opponent is GetUp.
It's the cumulative effect, Richo. So it was a combination of GetUp and the unions. So we had the CFMMEU, the ACTU, the Nurses and Midwifery Federation, the Teachers Union and the SDU as well. And then, of course, the Labor Party doing their normal thing, which was... this campaign, I've got to say, was a lot more personal from the Labor Party in terms of their attacks as well
Nicole,
than
let me just ask,
what we saw in 2016.
Let me just ask Richo, because, you know, you've been around a long time. I mean, people watching us now would say, well, why weren't the police called in? When people chuck eggs over someone's electorate office, when people make allegations that some person's a prostitute, when people deface posters under the guise of an election campaign, why aren't the police called in? If not then now?
The record of prosecuting people on this is pretty lousy. The police don't regard this as their primary job, and so I think they don't treat it as seriously as they might. And I think the message would have to go out to them that much more needs to be done.
Definitely. See, Nicole, you said they wanted to get me to a point where I couldn't function as a candidate, where I was afraid to go out. It was a campaign that has very serious ramifications for how we conduct politics in this country. We regard ourselves as an open and civil society. Instead, I ended up feeling unsafe for much of the campaign. You said I was scared, and towards the end of the campaign, I did have a moment with egg attacks and vile graffiti and stalking that I wondered if it was worth it. What do you mean by that?
Well, Alan, when you have suffered, as I said, the cumulative effect of all of those different things and all of the very deeply personal attacks, when my mum, who, you know, helped out as a volunteer on my campaign from time to time, spent 2 hours scrubbing the egg off my campaign office because we had to clean it up because we were just renting the property, that's when you wonder if it's worth it. And in those last weeks, I ended up not being able to drive my campaign car, so that was fully branded ended up with my face all over the side of it, my name, and, you know, listening to my community, delivering for my community. And I just had to stop driving it because I felt unsafe. I was such an obvious, visible target that we made the decision that it was just too dangerous for me to continue to be so easily identifiable in the community. And we also made the decision that I just couldn't be on my own campaigning. Now, I'm a fiercely independent woman. I do as much as I possibly can for myself and on my own. And that was the big difference for me, was that I had to make sure that someone was with me because my campaign team, and I was worried for my safety if I was on my own.
What about the police? Did you call the police? Did you ring them and say, I've got a real problem, I'm now worried?
Yes, and the South Australian Police were absolutely magnificent. I cannot thank them enough for their wonderful support. They took it very seriously, especially the stalker, and the behaviour stopped after they got involved, and I'm incredibly grateful.
But hang on, Nicole. What happened to this stalker? I mean, the stalker was everywhere. Everywhere Nicole went, there was this stalker. Outside her office, when she spoke, when she travelled, the stalker was there. Well, what's happened to this bloke?
Well, thankfully, he has disappeared. As I said, the South Australian Police were magnificent, and I'm incredibly grateful for their support.
But on the Friday before polling day, I understand you arrived at your Dawes Road campaign office to find it covered in eggs and the words, quote, $60 per hour written across your neck and on your electoral posters. So the voter was being told the day before the election that Nicole Flint, the Liberal candidate, was a prostitute.
That's correct, Alan, yeah. I mean, and this is, again, this is the really disappointing feature of this campaign, and this is why I'm speaking out, because I don't want to see this behaviour condoned or encouraged, and I strongly believe that the very personal attacks against me by GetUp and the unions and Labor encouraged the aggression and the vandalism and the poorest behaviour we've ever seen in South Australia. So I hope that by speaking up now, and I will continue to over this term of Parliament, that people who engaged in this sort of behaviour, and certainly the campaigns, the sort of campaigns that were run by GetUp and Labor and the unions, they'll have a good think about how they're approaching politics and election campaigns next time.
Nicole, May 18's come and gone. Richo, it's come and gone. Where are all these people now, and what is being done, if anything, to guarantee that this won't happen next time there's an election?
Not much.
No.
Is the answer, I think.
Well, certainly, Alan and Richo, you know, here within the Federal Parliament we have the Joint Standing Committee on Electoral Matters, and I will be providing a very comprehensive submission. I know my colleague Kevin Andrews has said that he will do so as well, and we're talking to all of our colleagues to encourage them to put on the parliamentary record precisely what they were subject to, the type of campaigns that were run against them, so that it's there on the record, it's available to journalists, to any members of the public who are interested in having a look at what happened, and we can continue the debate about how we, hopefully, I think, bring politics back to a more respectful debate.
Well, good on you. Now, look, one of the reasons we wanted to have you on is that people can see you, and you can see from this lady, she's a very decent lady, very presentable to the electorate, very articulate, not frightened, a lot of courage, the sort of stuff you need in a political candidate.
Absolutely.
And basically, at the end of the day, Nicole, I think we could say you've helped a lot of people understand the triumph. You beat them, you were elected, but also the tribulations, and hang in there. I think you've got a big future, and thank you for talking to us.
I'll wait for the day you become a minister.
Absolutely.
It will happen.
Absolutely.
It will happen.
Absolutely. That's Nicole Flint. Good to talk to you, Nicole. The Liberal member, not candidate, for the South Australian seat of Boothby.